Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Glad you can join us. For those of you on the East Coast, it's the afternoon. For those of you on other time zones, it's a little bit earlier. But we have an interesting discussion today dealing with military members who are service members, both women and men, who transition from government service to the private sector. And I have an esteemed panel with me. Representing different parts of the discipline and also where they're at in their transition, as been there a while, just starting, and someone who's assisting. So we're going to go ahead and go around the horn here. I'm going to start with a brief introduction of a few of you, and then I'd like for you to go ahead and expound on that a little bit. So we have Rick Howard from the Cyberwire. We have Hise Gibson from the United States Military Academy, and Kendrick Vaugn, who helps military members transition. So, Rick, go ahead and start this off for us, please.
Hey, thanks, Carlos. I did 23 years in the U.S. Army. I was a signal corps guy, a computer guy, and my last job in the Army was I was the commander of the Army's Computer Emergency Response Team. And I transitioned out, and I did something different than what most people did. I went right to a pure play security company, which is not what most people don't do. They usually go to a Beltway Bandit or something like that, because those are pseudo military groups. But I went to a pure play and got immersed into how to do commercial business. So that's my experience.
Hise, you want to follow up with that, because you're at the opposite extreme of this transition?
Absolutely. My name's Hise Gibson. I'm a colonel in the United States Army, helicopter pilot by training, and have had the opportunity to be in awesome spaces around the globe, by Iraq, Afghanistan, commanding in the 82nd, and in between stopped by the Harvard Business School and got a doctorate in technology and operations management. And currently I'm an academy professor at the United States Military Academy in systems engineering. And on the other end, after 25 years for transition, and I end up at the Harvard Business School and teach operations. So again, at the very end of the extreme of a transition, but have had the opportunity to better understand how valuable all the experiences that I've gained in the military can enable and make more efficient operations for organizations. So that's the value that we bring.
And you forgot to mention your long tour in Korea, also in the Republic of Korea.
That was only 2.5 years. That's it.
Kendrick, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you just bringing this panel together for such an important conversation. My name is Kendrick Vaugn. I am currently working as a director at BreakLine Education. But prior to joining this organization, I spent 13 years in the military, commissioned as an air defender. So I do have Colonel Gibson beat on the Korea long tour. We were over there for 4 years with my family, so I was trying to break a couple records out there. But my final role in the military was I was actually the director of diversity admissions at West Point. I did that for 4 years, got a chance to really work in the DE&I space, and really just watch high schoolers make a really cool transition from civilian to cadet and ultimately to Army officer. That was a huge part of the reason I wanted to join the BreakLine team. We are in the position to help veterans pivot into the tech industry. And it's just such an important juncture in an individual's career and in their personal journey. So just super excited to shed a little light on that process, hopefully share a few words of encouragement, and then empower people to feel like the best version of themselves as they make this pivot.
Well, thanks. You have a very important role as you're that transition person, the assist. So let's talk about the panel, kind of the discussion, where we're going to go with it today. We talk about this transition, and we all do it at one point in our career, whether it's 4 years or like Hise, almost 30. And the idea behind that is we really do learn something in the military, and we instill a culture and some values that you start from day one, so much so that we wear it on our dog tags. And it's something that's recited over and over and over. What's our role as an officer, as a non-commissioned officer, as a soldier to the American people? But when we transition to the private sector, it's kind of abrupt. And the way I'm a first generation immigrant, and the way I would describe it is, it's like you're a first generation immigrant from the military and that type of service into the private sector. There's a culture clash. There are values that don't necessarily line up. What's important to one and to the other, the whole idea of the team concept, the individual, what the bottom line is literally in the private sector versus in the government, especially in the military, we talk about selfless service. So when you step into that role, it could be quite a jarring experience. Kendrick, you've probably helped multiple people go through that transition. What's your take on that?
Well, JC, I appreciate the lead up to that question. And what I will tell you is, as someone whose father was in the military, I went straight from high school to West Point into the military service. So the military was a huge part of my personal identity. And I love the way that you just introduced that as a starting point for this conversation, because I think for a lot of us, some of us don't even realize how big of a part of our identity it is until it is time to make this transition. And for me personally, what I will tell you is transitioning from the military into the private sector was like one of the most jarring experiences of my life. And there's so much stuff that people don't talk to you about and they don't tell you about. The differences in, like you said, you know, being a part of like this community, team-based, mission-driven organization versus going in the private sector where it's like, okay, we've got this mission, but at the end of the day, you got to drive this revenue. So you see what seems like a dichotomy in experiences, but I think one of the things that has been most helpful to me, and one of the things that we try to just instill in all of the individuals that are making this transition, is just seeing the unique value in that military experience. And I think one of the things, and I just transitioned from the military this past year, so still very new in this transition. And I think one of the things that has been most empowering, not only for myself, but I've seen in others, is seeing the unique value that military service brings to the organization. I think when I first tried to make that pivot into the tech industry, I was really trying to fit the mold, you know, and you try to espouse to this persona of what it means to be in the tech industry. And you try to look at the problem the same way that everyone else in the organization is looking at the problem. And it's so easy to just fall into this trap of, man, I'm not fitting this persona, right? But then it's when you take a step back and you have conversations with your peers about the importance of culture, about the importance of the overarching mission. And you just see these light bulbs going off. You're like, oh man, like, oh yeah, it is important to build camaraderie. It is important, you know, to think about the mission and the culture, and to bring folks, to galvanize folks around this idea. And ultimately, all of that stuff is going to help drive revenue. Oh man, that's a novel idea. So you begin to realize that you have this tremendously valuable skill set because of the way that you were brought up professionally, because of the way that you look at the world, that now provides immense value to these organizations. And that's one of the number one things that we talk to our veterans about, is don't try to fit the mold. They got a bunch of people in the organization that already have that mold. There's so much value in your unique military experience and that identity that you bring to the table that's going to help drive that organization to the next level. And then from the organizational side of the house, one piece that I just wanted to put out there for organizations that are welcoming veterans into their community is, if you haven't worked with a veteran before, if you haven't had a veteran on your team, I think there's a lot of misperceptions about, you know, the skill sets that veterans bring, the work ethic that we can bring to the table. If you can just bring one veteran onto your team, into your ecosystem, and get a chance to just see their work ethic, get a chance to have those conversations with them, I think there are so many barriers that are broken down in this cultural divide that empower leaders within the organization to really leverage that skill set that our veterans bring into this space. So just wanted to share that as a starting point for the conversation. I know, between Rick and Hise, there's a lot of thought we could add to that, but just wanted to intro that as a starting point for the conversation.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we're not just talking to veterans, we're talking to employers as well. And the idea that it's a culture clash for both, and how do you adjust to that? And the whole thing on revenue, I remember having a conversation with someone in business, and I asked what their priorities were. And they said, my first priority is revenue. I said, okay, so what's your second priority? Well, it's revenue. Let me guess what your third priority is. Revenue? Absolutely. And it's not a judgment. It's just recognizing that there is this different value system, and you're in their space now, which is soon to be your space as well. Rick, anything to follow up on that?
Yeah, we were talking about this when we were planning for this meeting. All right, one is that I think it's a mistake to think that the military's work ethic is better or unique compared to the commercial sector. That's not true, right? If you look at any, I'm familiar with Silicon Valley companies. These folks, in a successful Silicon Valley company, these folks work in 70, 80 hours a week, talk about work ethic there. And so that it's not that, okay. What you bring to the table as a military veteran is all this experience in lots of different places, right? And so when you come to and what you've turned into after a career in the military is you are a problem solver, right? And no problem is too hard for you to tackle because you've been trained to do that. And you should probably try to leverage that. But there's a couple of things that I would consider, right? Kendrick and Carlos has said, the commercial sector thinks about things differently than the military does. My biggest awakening, in my last job in the military, I was, in charge of operations for the Army. And, I was a big, important guy, got a big seat and, had an office and blah, blah, blah. When you go to the commercial sector, operations is not the most important thing. Okay. It's a cost center. Okay. The most important thing is the sales team. My first gig out of the military, I was running an international stock for one of the first MSSPs, and had trouble getting money to buy pencils for the analysts in the SOC. Right. But we would drop $10,000 on a dinner for a customer that may or may not, buy our product, right? So that was a rude and awakening for me coming out of the military, right? So you just need to adjust yourself, okay, about what's important and what's not, okay? So one of the interesting things about all that is you're a generalist in the military and expected to be handed any kind of job, and you're just supposed to kind of take it on and handle it. But in the commercial sector, they're hiring you to do a specific job, right? A job, right? And if you take it to the extreme, if you just look at a company like Netflix, right? They hire you to do something. And then when you're done, you don't move on to the next thing within the company. They let you go, right? And they hire someone else to do the next thing, right? So that is the extreme example, but it is a general example in the commercial sector. So my advice to anybody transitioning out of the military is to leverage those skill sets that you've been taught. And there's a couple of them, right? Like I said, solving problems. The other thing you're really good at that you probably don't know you're good at is communicating what you know to people that don't know what you know. I'm talking about summarizing and making it easy to understand, even though it's this really technical thing or really financially complex thing you're trying to understand. But your ability to put that into something that's useful, that other leaders who are smart, but not in your area, can understand and make decisions on, you should leverage those skills, right? And become valuable. And I guess the third thing I would think as you do this transition, become the smartest person in the room, right? Whatever the thing is you're tackling, right? That's how you get noticed. That's how you get more responsibility. Don't lord it over everybody, but just become the person that people go to when they have a question about the thing you're smart at, right? And then that's how you kind of ease your way into this commercial sector. I don't know, Carlos, what do you think about all that?
No, I think that's great. And one thing that I learned from the military is be the best supporter of the team. And it's better to have a championship team than to be the one superstar. Right. And that's also a little bit of a culture clash in the private sector because superstars get rewarded. But in the military, we look at the team success. And so part of that is finding the right organization that aligns to the values that you're comfortable with. But speaking of superstars, I've been with, I've known Hise for, way too long. And you've actually, led battalions, you've led hundreds of soldiers in hostile environments. As you instill these values and you put mission first, people always, which is a common term we use in the Army at least, you get a sense of identity. What are some of the challenges that you're facing as you're transitioning over into the next phase of your career?
Well, I think that's a great question. And just building off of the previous comments, I think the hardest thing or most challenging thing for many veterans or anyone going through a transition is defining what success looks like. And I say that because in the military, success is the next promotion. Success is getting Italy or Carson as your post or getting the great assignment in the building being the Pentagon.
I was a huge failure then, Hise. I never got any of those plum assignments. Right?
Don't worry, me neither. I just heard about them.
You got Korea, Afghanistan, and Iraq.
Yeah, look at that. The triple bonus. Yeah.
But Germany twice. So it all works out. And so I think that's the part in which we struggle with, because success is defined and codified in the Department of the Army pamphlet 600-3. So we know as an officer, here's the road in which we will travel. And the reality is in the civilian sector, depending on what industry you're operating in, unless you're going to a GE, GM, Raytheon, a very large matrix-like organization, that pathway does not necessarily exist in the same way. It is not linear, and you have to take steps back to move forward. And there's some ego punches that are challenging for, again, not just military folks, but anyone going through a transition. And because of the world in which we're operating in, the fluidity of everyone's transition has amplified, especially because of COVID. And since Kendrick operates in the tech space, and so does Rick, the reality is your technical experts come to a company, they expect to leave after 2 years and take all they learn and go to the next place and go to the next place. And so I think it's almost a rewiring that has to occur prior to making that transition. And there's a lot of self-reflection required so that you can understand that finally, for the first time in your life, you get to define what success is. And it might not be what we're accustomed to, having the big office, having the big desk, having a lot of people. Maybe you just want to add value, but even that term is pretty vague, because who defines the value? And does that value connect to the revenue in order for the business to be viable? And so these are all the things that we don't think about, because at least in the military, money ain't a problem. I can Google everyone's salary and no one cares. But very different than operating in the civilian sector. So I think for me, it's been a journey, as we've talked, JC, around what does success look like? How do I define success? And how do I want the next 5 to 10 years to be like? Because in the military, if we're honest with ourselves, we deal in multiple choice opportunities, A, B, C, and then HRC gives you double A that you didn't pick. The human
resources. That's the organization that allegedly manages your career.
Yeah. Allegedly is an operative word. But in the civilian sector, it is an essay test where you get to write out, define, be very verbose, and sometimes the one who can write the best essay is the winner. And that's a skill set that we don't, not say we don't have, it's just very benign because the way in which we have operated for 2 years, 5 years, 20 years or 40 years. We just don't have that skill set because we've never needed it. So that's been the most challenging thing.
I'm glad you said that, because when I talk to people that are transitioning out, especially the senior folks, right? They're used to being in charge of things. They're used to being commanders and S3s and those kinds of things, right? There are no equivalent jobs like that in the civilian sector, except for maybe the CEO and maybe the CEO, the COO, right? And so you have to decide what you said. You know, you get to define what your success is. You have to decide what you want to be when you grow up, right? And there's lots of things you can do, but on the tech side, you know, there's product management, there is internal operations, there is, you know, like I've been a CISO a couple of times, which I love, right? But you can also be a marketing person, you can be a salesperson, you can be lots of different things, but you kind of have to decide, okay, what you want to be and pursue that with vigor.
Can I just add one point there? Because I think both of these are tremendously important points. And one of the things I loved about what you just got done saying, Hise, is you're absolutely right. It's not a multiple choice test. And I think one of the things that I would encourage anyone who's going through this transition to think about is just, it's a super reflective process. And even as you join these organizations, unless you're operating in sales where you're carrying a quota or you've got something that's just a very clear benchmark, you can ask for the clear definition of success and it might not be given to you. So you almost have to be able to navigate the world in a way in which you set the goals and the milestones for yourself. And you understand that maybe some of those goals are going to be met within the organization that you're currently a part of. Maybe, you may have to pivot and you may have a couple of leapfrog type of situations where you're experimenting with different organizations and different roles until you're able to step into that role where you can be the highest and best version of yourself and continue to move towards the things that you're passionate about and you're excited to be a part of. So I absolutely just wanted to double down and say it's a very reflective process. And there is a lot of ambiguity that you're going to have to navigate on the other side.
I think you brought up some great points there, Kendrick, and Hise and Rick for that matter. And in my notes that I'm writing here, I had self-reflection. I was going to bring that up, but you already highlighted that. I talk to a lot of mentors and mentors or coaches, as Hise referred to it, but to me is like there's coaches because they're peers. They're not necessarily people who are above me or below me. They're people who add value to the discussion of the challenges that I'm trying to embark upon. And one thing when I am the coach or mentor is I tell somebody there are only 3 types of jobs out there. If you break it all down, there's 3 fundamental jobs. There's a job you take that gives you job satisfaction. There's a job that gives you advancement opportunities where you're learning something for the job after next. And there's a job that gives you quality life and you have to pick one. What is it that you want? And make sure that what you're looking for in the job is being fulfilled by that next adventure. What somebody once shared with me also, again, one of my, used to be senior to me, now we're peers and now we're coaches, we help each other out. As he mentioned to me that the way you get promoted in the tech field is by leaving. There's no goat trail. You get hired to do a job, like was mentioned earlier, and you're going to do that job. But if you want to have that next job, is find that company that's going to hire you to do that job because someone else is probably doing that job pretty well in the tech field. Now, Rick, you've been in the tech field forever with multiple companies. This was our mutual friend, Stephen Bates. How accurate is he? And you also mentioned the generalist to the specialist. I read resumes all day long. And from a military person, I would ask him, tell me what you are good at. Tell me what you want to do and what you are good at. I don't want to hear that you're a jack of all trades because I'm not hiring you for that. I'm hiring you for this specific job. So there's 2 parts to your question. Is validate whether Stephen Bates was accurate on that. And then the other part is the generalist versus the specialist in the private sector.
Yeah, Steve's absolutely right. And especially when it comes to negotiating your salary, right? Because what you negotiate going in is what you're going to be. To get a promotion once you got into the job is really hard, right? So you don't go from being a director to a vice president. Okay, it happens, but it is not the norm, right? So whatever you negotiate is what you're going to be. So what you said, Carlos, is right. If you're a director now and you want to be a VP, you're probably going to change companies to go get that. And I forgot what the second question was. So give me
the generalist to the specialist, the jack of all trades. I say that in the military. This is a tech group here. I always say that everyone in the military, and no one ever finds this funny, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's true.
Until somebody laughs.
Somebody laughs. I got Rick to laugh. I haven't even said the joke yet. But everyone in the military has two skills that they are proficient at. The first one is security. You start security from day one when you enter basic training, when you enter officer training corps, whatever it is. Security is embedded in everything we do. And we're talking about cybersecurity here in tech. So that part, but the other part is everyone's a maintenance person because everyone starts from sweeping, mopping. I did not attend the academy, but you guys can explain what a SAMI is and how well you guys know how to clean. And it goes to your vehicles, it goes to your helicopters, it goes to whatever it is. You're a maintenance manager and a maintenance person, regardless of what your job is in the Army. But when you're hired into the private sector, you're hired to do something very specific. You're filling a gap or a need, unless you're in one of those larger companies that have a developmental program. So Rick, on that note, you've worked with a lot of companies. How would you address that?
Well, let's just talk about your resume for a second, right? I see a lot of military resumes, people transitioning out, and they like to list everything they've ever done in their whole lives. You know, it's the I love me resume, right? And I'm not looking for that guy, right? I'm looking for, like I said, a person to do a job. So my recommendation to people transitioning out is to build that I love me resume that's 100 pages, everything you've ever possibly done. But when you're applying for a specific job, copy that to another resume and edit out everything that doesn't apply specifically to the job you're trying to get, right? And narrow the focus. Prove to the reader, right, that you're the guy you're the person that can do that job, right? And be very specific about it. Even if you were the maintenance guy that swapped the deck on the Navy ship, how do you take that and say, you know, I use that skill to be a great product manager? You know, you need to be very specific about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and
can I add one piece there as well, JC?
Jump on in.
Yeah, so one of the things that I just wanted to add as part of this discussion is I think the importance of mentorship and sponsorship in this space is so tremendously important. And one of the things, and I'm gonna brag on you here, Hise, Colonel Gibson here, is Colonel Gibson's been a phenomenal mentor to me. And as I was kind of thinking through, you know, the decision to stay in the military or potentially transition, I think even the language in which we speak about these things is very different in the uniform versus out of the uniform. And an example that I'll use, for example, is before transitioning into the private sector, I had no clue what customer success was. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't be a good customer success manager. It doesn't mean that I hadn't developed that skill set over the course of my career. You know, sales is another great example. You know, I spent 4 years working as the director of diversity admissions at West Point. And in my mind, I think I'm just, you know, I'm working in DE&I, maybe a little bit of recruiting, but at the end of the day, that's like a sales role. You know, I have a goal, I have a quota on which I'm operating against, you know, and I'm selling a product or a service to a particular demographic, right? So these are all things that have analogous, counterpoints in the private sector, but oftentimes we're not told as service members that these are skill sets that we possess. And I think often when you have a mentor who's been in the private sector, they can help tease out some of those skill sets that you have and that you'd be a great fit for, but we've just never had anyone break it down to us like that. So I think it's tremendously important that you don't allow this to be an isolating journey, that you reach out, you find folks, you find your tribe, you find a group of folks who can kind of school you up and help just instill that sense of confidence that no, you are a generalist, but you do have some very valuable skill sets, which could make you a great asset to these organizations as you make that transition.
And that's a great point, Kendrick. And to what you were saying, Rick, on the resume, and then in the comments section from the attendees, I see some comments on resumes and different and where to promote yourself and how to promote yourself. One thing that I've done with a bunch of junior people, when we did kind of like a speed dating thing where we went to a university and read like 50 resumes quickly. And before I ever read the resume, I would ask the individual, what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to do? And then I want to know, where is it on here? And especially in cybersecurity. With universities, we know that the education system is all over the place on what cybersecurity education should look like. But one of them, this was very common, say, I like to do forensics. I like to do capture the flags. I like to break into things and see how they work. I really dig this. And I look at their resume and they're talking about the classes they took, their major, and way at the bottom, this extracurricular club. I was the president of the capture the flag team at my university that did all of these things. And they follow the format that this is what a resume is supposed to look like. But that was at the very bottom. And what I would tell them is like, if I don't find what I'm looking for in your interest in the top, I'm not even going to get to the bottom. But if you want to be this hacker, this forensics guy, this red teamer, and all these cool things, put that in front and then put everything that supports that desire that you have. I want to know what you want to see if you're a fit for my team and if I'm a fit for you, because you're joining a team. You're not just coming in as an individual to do a job. You're going to be a part of something bigger than yourself. But anyway, with that, Hise, what's your comment on that? You're big on talent.
I think to build off what Kendrick highlighted is the idea about mentorship and sponsorship. If we're honest in the military, we're a get-her-done kind of organization. We're instilled about meeting an objective, working hard as a team, which are all ridiculously important attributes for any team-based organization. The challenge is when we transition to a civilian setting, that might not be as valuable. Not to say you don't need to get things done, but I think there's an inability that we have to be our best marketing officer when required. We push down the spring butt kind of individual, someone who is constantly trying to illuminate and bring light on themselves. That is not a great trait in the military because we're such a team-based organization. Unfortunately, that ingrained way of operating can have a negative impact on transitioning military individuals, because although you were able to get things done, we weren't able to communicate what we're doing and how this adding value to the bottom line. And to both of your points around resumes, we're speaking French, the employer is speaking English, and we don't have a great interpreter to help us transition the language in which we're operating and how we can operate to help the organization. And to your point, JC, we don't recognize the jack of all trades reality is actually not good when trying to get your foot in the door. There comes a point at certain levels, I'll say like at Rick's level, or as you're moving through right now, JC, you can have the jack of all trades. There's a whole lot of other things that you've already built up in your kit bag and reputation to where you can make that statement, but everyone also understands where your expertise lies and how you can enable organization and drive revenue. When you're just transitioning out, you don't have that runway. You don't have prior deployments. You don't have prior assignments with other people that can speak on your behalf yet. So it's a starting over reality that sometimes, especially I think Rick highlighted, especially senior folks, and I'll use the term senior, I'll say anyone with 15 years or greater in the military, has a greater challenge in this than folks with less than 15 years in. I think I could probably show that empirically if I just did a quick study on that, because things are so ingrained in how we operate that we assume that everyone's going to think that my lieutenant colonel, general rank means something. And in the civilian sector, it means about absolutely nothing. I can buy a good cup of coffee at McDonald's with it. That's about it. What can you do for me? And I think that's our challenge in recognizing that reality in the civilian sector. So we don't understand our talent and what value we bring. We're challenged at communicating, translating, and then some folks have a real hang up on ego and don't recognize that the millennial in the SOC could care less where you just came from. Can you do the job? Do I trust you? And can you help me get better? Or I'm going to leave and get better somewhere else.
You know, that's a great point. It's since I've transitioned, I've worked for people who are younger than me, but more experienced than me. Mm-hmm. And that's a big shocker sometimes. You mentioned a couple of things on the translation, and let's see where you guys go with this here. So job titles. Let's see, I was a platoon leader. I was a company commander. I was a 3-5 platoon leader. I was a flight platoon leader. I got to do that a few different times. Mm-hmm. I also was a CSSAMO. I guess it was the IA chief, a job that I think Rick Howard and I both held, the same job at 18th Airborne Corps. But none of these things, even I didn't understand what they were. What about that translation of roles and responsibilities? Who wants to take on that?
Well, I'll just start by saying, yeah, the people you're coming to work for in the commercial sector have no idea what that is. Okay, zero. So if you're highlighting that in your resume, there's a good chance they're going to throw that right into the trash bin. I was reading something in the New York Times today that, you know, only 1% of Americans have either have been in the military or have family members in the military. Right. So when you say you're the commander or something, the only thing they know what that means is looking at a Jason Bourne movie. All right. That's the only thing they know. All right. So you got to do that translation and get someone to help you do that translation when you're writing that resume out. Commander means what to this commercial sector?
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I think in recognizing that scope of responsibility, everything we do, at least in a military construct, is based on roles and responsibility and scope. And almost, there's technically only one profit and loss manager in the Army. We will call him the chief of staff of the Army. He's technically the only P&L person who can actually make those kind of decisions. However, based on the roles and responsibility, you can make a case for P&L like responsibility because we at division, brigade, and below level, you have the ability to move things, just not to this exact same extent because we don't operate on revenue. And then recognizing that a platoon leader in some areas might be a managing director in others, where a platoon leader in one thing may be actually a director role based on scope of responsibility. So making those translations and then understanding how to communicate. Like if I was a SSA, a supply or warehouse manager, well, Amazon has warehouses, Walmart has warehouses, or fulfillment centers. You're basically a fulfillment center director if you're an SSA person. That's what you are. And you're managing all of these things. You could literally go one for one, but you got to do the research. And so that's some of the other back end, doing your own research to ensure that you understand what you're talking about. And to Rick's point, writing a resume focused on the job you're trying to get and not doing a shotgun blast of jargon on 2 pieces of paper.
Now that's true. And we look at, in the military, it's real simple. We put how many people we lead, we put how much budget we manage, and then we put our task, our mission that we have on that. And even that, when you say the money we manage, it's always in gajillions of dollars because but it's doesn't necessarily translate the same way, but it's also recognizing the different role that you have for the industry you're going into. For instance, when I was working with the financial sector, I remember someone saying, you know, a VP, and I thought VP is, you know, way up here. And they said, not in the financial sector. In another company, it is a managing director. A director is what you're envisioning as a VP in the financial sector. So just like the military has its own titles, you have to translate that to the private sector and your industry. So make sure you do your homework and don't do it alone. There are people out there. Rick, I don't know how many times I spoke with you at every transition opportunity, and I always asked, who else do I need to talk to? Who else do I need to talk to give me more data points as I go? Now, Kendrick, this is your business. You help people transition. Do you have any guidance that you give the transitioning, again, not just the military people, but the employers?
So one piece that I wanted to add here is, I know we've got a chance to speak a lot about resumes. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, this is a huge, huge missed opportunity and resource.
Hey, and that's a big deal, Kendrick, because, you know, the military folks, they don't like to put their name out there, right? Look, so, you know,
so I just, we work, so at the organization I work with at BreakLine, we work with about 75 tech companies across the industry. And what I'll tell you is, every hiring manager, every recruiter that we work with, the starting point for sourcing talent is LinkedIn, period. And I think, you know, as service members, you know, to Colonel Gibson's point, it's not something that we necessarily have to think about, because we have a very defined career progression and trajectory. And on the outside, you almost have to be like your own self-promoter, right? And the first step in doing that is creating a good LinkedIn profile, making sure you got a clear picture up there. You know, there's a lot of people don't even have LinkedIn profile pictures. And, you know, your profile is you have a 21 times more likely chance of your profile getting looked at just by adding a picture to your LinkedIn profile, right? So all of these things that you talk about in terms of like translating your experiences and making sure that they're codified in a way that's going to drive value for your personal brand, all this stuff has to translate over into your LinkedIn profile as well, because that's where a lot of these transactions and these opportunities are being generated.
Kendrick, you make a fantastic point. I'm a huge believer in LinkedIn. And let me just offer this as advice. Everything you do on LinkedIn is not for the job you're trying to get now. It's for the job you're going to get later.
Come on now.
Right? Right. It's the next job you're going to get. Right. So, and then you should have an opinion about stuff in your field, whatever job you're trying to get, you know, write for LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be a 100-page, you know, a thesis, but have an opinion and get people to notice you. Right. And LinkedIn's a perfect platform for that.
It's having a theme of, this is how I'm trying to market myself, how I'm trying to present myself. And that's when I read, again, like a resume, LinkedIn is what is that job you're after? And the missed opportunity, talk about missed opportunities in the military. Right now, when you're in service, you get so much attention that you have no idea when that goes away. When you leave the uniform, people aren't going to thank you for just walking down the street. And my last role in the military was public-private partnerships, to manage the public sector relationships for the Army cyber community. And I had stacks of business cards, you know, huge stacks, but no LinkedIn profile, because, you know, we got to stay dark. We got to stay mysterious, like Jason Bourne and all that stuff. And for the non-military people, yes, that is our life normally.
Yeah.
Of course it is. But it was a missed opportunity. And then as I was getting ready to transition, other veteran who I talked to said, you got to hit that magic number on LinkedIn. Anyone know what that magic number is on LinkedIn? 500. 500 connections.
Once you get to 500, they stop keeping count.
They stop keeping count.
Well, so one thing that I just wanted to add to that, JC, is, you know, not to put too much pressure on the LinkedIn, but what I will say is, you know, just from a professional networking standpoint, there are so many people that you probably have in your corner right now who are willing to help you out, who are willing to start a conversation, who are willing to make an introduction. that you might not even know about. And, one of the easiest things that we always encourage people to do is LinkedIn has this really cool function where it's going to recommend people based off of the small network that you already have that you may have even just forgot about. Just start adding folks. Just start adding folks that you may have interacted with earlier in your career that are out and made the transition. Because the thing about it is a lot of times it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And you
absolutely
need to be able to get that
Yeah.
warm introduction that makes the difference between your resume getting screened and not getting screened in the first place. So it's super important to leverage that professional network that you have earned by having a good name, a good reputation, a good professional track record. I mean, you've built up a lot of social capital over the course of your career, whether you've been in for 3 years or you've been in for 20 years. So you got to leverage all that social capital to be a platform and a springboard as you think about this next chapter. And LinkedIn is a great tool for you to be able to do that as well.
Kendrick, I tell this to everybody, right? I've never gotten a job because of how good I was, right? Never, right? It's always because I knew somebody at the place I was going, right? And that is called networking, and you should start it early and continue to work on that. It's just one of your skills that you have.
One thing I want to highlight, you mentioned the job market and how you're going to be viewed. But one thing that I also tell the military who is working in the field that I was in, the cyber side or the technical side, is you're this highly qualified expert. And those jobs aren't necessarily going to be advertised. So you may have the opportunity to define your job and go to someone and say, these are the things I can do for you. And they're going to create the job for you. So Hise, I'm going to come back to you on this one here. How do you translate that? And then for the others on this, how do you assess your value? How do you put your value where you're coming in? Because I'll tell you, do not use your government salary as an example, as a jump from there. So Hise, how would you translate that special skill that you developed into your next job?
I think it's a great point. I think a great question. And I think the challenge that many of us have in the military is that the first metric will be your military salary around adding value. So as a colonel in the Army, my value is X. And let's just use let's use numbers. Let's say 150. It's actually more than that, but let's just use that as an easy number. So that's what you think. The challenge is, as a military person, you don't realize you've never paid attention to compensation or compensation packages, or really understanding the value that your ability to help, let's say, big idea people operationalize things in order for things to be implemented, how valuable just that ability is. Because as Rick highlighted, less than 1% of the population is in the military. Again, what we don't acknowledge as our value is that we have been trained over time to make big bites into small bites around anything, be it running a range or moving armies into theater. We can make big bites into small bites at the drop of a hat. And that skill set has been developed over many repetitions. So why would we not realize that that's valuable? And that value on that, just on the onset, is about $100,000 of additional comp for that ability if you can communicate it. And that's actually a lot more than that. I'm just using big numbers because it just sounds good, right? So I think being able to bring order to chaos, being able to, because especially in the tech space, you have tech founders who have great ideas, who have their babies being their ideas in their companies, but they may be challenged translating what they need to be implemented, and then staying on top of the folks at the end of the keyboard on the keyboard doing the job. There's a huge gap. You got doers and big idea people, and we fit squarely in the middle as almost like systems engineers and integrators who can talk to both sides. And we don't realize we've actually been trained to do that over a career. And on top of that, we've been working with diverse teams our entire existence. So we have and that's a question in the chat that I know Rick's going to add on to, but I wanted to highlight that because although there's less than 1%, that less than 1% comes from all U.S. states and U.S. territories and other countries. And we've had the ability to interact with multiple types of people with ease by virtue of the job, which means when we go into organizations, we're very comfortable once we're settled to interact with anyone in order to meet an objective. So that objective mindedness comes into play and is also value added. So I think translating, communicating, operationalizing is the value that is brought to any organization and adds immense value, because then the big idea people can hand it off to you and walk away knowing it's going to get done. Now, not in every case, because we are people. So, but on average.
The point you made about diversity is true, and it's probably a skill set most of the military don't realize they have. Right. And the question came from my good friend, John Damas. We've worked together for many years. Right. But he's absolutely right. You look at the panel here. This is a pretty diverse panel for a tech panel. Yeah. Right. If we were going to do this again, I'd get rid of me, the old white guy, and bring in a woman in here. Right. But we have all this experience handling diverse teams. And that is not the case in the tech sector. Right. It's a bunch of old white guys running the show still, 20 years after the internet really got going. All right. And so if you can bring that to the table, right, and show where a good, strong, diverse team makes the entire organization better. Okay. That's another skill set you can bring to bear in the commercial sector.
I think those are all really good points. And just some of the development of the teams that you bring to it. Just this morning, I was going over some of the methods and processes that we use in the military to develop our people. And so there's great things that you can bring to your organization, but there's also things that I would recommend you shed. And being at Fort Bragg for a few years, and you're sitting in any common area, I would play a game with my children, and they're all adults now, but it's like, who's who? That guy over there, that's from CAG, the Delta groups, the super spooks. That guy over there, he's from an infantry unit, and that guy over there, just by how they dress in their civilian attire. And we all have this persona that we give off. But Rick, how do we shed some of that negative stereotype when you're in the environment?
I shared the story when we were prepping for this, right? It's my favorite story of transitioning, right? I knew that there was this persona, the civilians that I was going to go work for when I transitioned out of the Army. They had a view of what they thought the military would be, and I didn't want to overexpose that. So I, on purpose, tried to tone down how we all behave when we're, in charge in the military. A commander, everybody says this, and they're going to jump 3,000 feet. I tried to really tone it down. And after a year, I had my first performance appraisal by my civilian boss. And the first comment I got from him was, you really need to tone down that military persona because it's just coming off too hard, right? So, it's something you should think about. The commercial sector is not the military. They don't operate in a hierarchy. It's more of a group effort. There's definitely people making decisions, but it is not a do what I say because I said it. They're not that kind of a crowd, all right? So just know that going in, and you're in the bring everybody to do the same thing you want everybody to do. It's convincing people to do stuff, which is just general leadership, okay? But you have to take the time to build those experiences.
I have one more piece here as well.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think is important to differentiate as well is, I know in the uniform, we're going to get feedback at least once a year. And if you're in a good unit, once a quarter. You're going to get your OER, you get your quarterly counseling. You're going to there's mechanisms in place for you to receive feedback about your performance and how you're doing within the organization. And I think one of the things that I would encourage everyone to think about as they're making the transition is the need to be proactive in seeking that feedback and that input. Because depending on what type of organization you go to, you might not get that feedback. And you may be thinking you're performing at X level, and that may be in complete misalignment with what's being perceived internal to the organization. So would just encourage you all to continue to seek that feedback, not only from the person that you're directly reporting to, but also from your peers. Because to Rick's point, you may have this idea that you've got it nailed and that you're being viewed in one way, where in all reality, it may be, there may be some delta between that. So just encourage everyone to seek that feedback as well.
So let me ask you for some feedback right now. We were kind of catching some of the questions that were in the chat and weaving them into the discussion here. What would you tell yourself or your employer, if you were the employer hiring someone, if you were to do this transition for the first time all over again? And this is all directed at Hise because he's making that transition here. So let's start with you, Rick.
Oh, what I would tell myself as I transitioned out, I'll give it back to Hise, because make sure you take care of your medical, right? Maybe do all of that, right? Don't say I'll do it later. I've talked to a lot of transitioning military that, they sort of did it, but really nail that, or you're going to be fighting that whole thing, your whole career, right? But in terms of thinking about the commercial sector, I want to piggyback on what Carlos said. Okay, there's a couple of different things you're going to take a job for. One is that you just really want to do that thing, and you would do it for free, right? Because it's a really cool thing to do. All right, so that's one type of job. And then the other one is, here's a stepping stone job that I want to use this to get to the real thing I want to do, right? And again, that salary might be, you might negotiate, you may not be the highest you'd want to get for that, right? But then there's these other jobs that they're paying for you, and know what your value is, or at least know what you think that value is, and negotiate for that. So what Hise said before is important. Know what the compensation package is, understand all the layers of that, because it's not straightforward like it is in a salary in the military, and know what you're going for.
And there's no commissary value in your annual.
Yeah, no housing allowance.
That's right. Kendrick, what would you say? What would you say to your younger self, or as an employer?
So I think from the individual perspective first, the number one thing that I would say is to not go it alone. I think oftentimes, it's easy to think that because we're going through this transition individually, that we're the only person that's ever done this. And it's so important to find that support system. It's so important to reach out and leverage your network, to find mentors, to find peers, just to kind of help shepherd you through that process. Because there's going to be some great times, there's going to be some moments of elation, and there's going to be some stressful and just like straight up disconcerting times. So I think it's important to find your tribe, to find that support system, to get plugged into the resources that are available to you. And then from the employer side of the house, I just want to go back to that first point of, just take the shot. Just take the shot. I mean, there are so many misperceptions out there about the veterans community. There's so many, just kind of personas that have been built around military service and what folks are bringing to the table. If you don't have a veteran in your organization, if you don't have a veteran on your team, just take the shot, because I think you will be pleasantly surprised with the passion, with the vigor, with the leadership, with the open-mindedness that these individuals bring to the table. And it is such a invaluable skill set to have on your team. So I would just say, just take the shot, because the value that our veterans bring into these spaces is not linear, it's exponential. So that's what I would say to the employers.
I'm going to say one thing here, because we're at the top of the hour here. For the transitioning veterans, take the time to transition. The Army is going to go on without you. You are not that valuable. Take the full 6 months and more than that. That last year's for you to transition. Hise, you have the last word, buddy.
And so, great conversation. I think everything, all the pro things have been said. And so start early and really start thinking about what you want to do, how you want to be, and where you want to be. Once you figure out what's the most important thing to you, you'll be fine, because it's going to be either quality of life, the compensation, or the job. And so once you figure those things out, I think you'll be better served. But thank you for pulling us together, JC, and great to be on the panel with Rick and Kendrick. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Gentlemen, thank you for spending your lunch hour with me. And for our guests out there, thanks again for being with us. And next time, we're going to have a super duper paratrooper, someone to represent the women in the military as well. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.